Chapter 22. The winding country road stretched out before them, a ribbon of moonlit gravel cutting through the rolling Irish hills. Rory McDuffie gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. The weight of the sword, wrapped carefully and stowed in the back seat, seemed to press down on him, a constant reminder of the perilous journey that lay ahead. Beside him, Henry Quinn dozed fitfully, his head lolling against the passenger window. In the back, John Walker nursed his bruises, the occasional grunt of discomfort breaking the tense silence that had settled over the car. Rory's mind raced as he navigated the familiar twists and turns of the road. How long had it been since he'd last seen Deirdre O'Rourke? 10 years? 15? The passage of time had blurred the edges of his memories, but he could still picture her as she'd been in their youth. All wild red hair and mischievous green eyes, always with her nose buried in a book. "You sure about this, Rory?" John's gruff voice cut through his reverie. "This friend of yours, can we trust her?" Rory met John's eyes in the rearview mirror, noting the wariness etched into the older man's face. "Aye," he said, his voice low so as not to wake Henry. "If there's anyone in this world I'd trust with my life, and Thelma's, it's Deirdre O'Rourke." John grunted, seemingly satisfied for the moment. But Rory could sense the unasked question hanging in the air between them. Should they tell Deirdre about the sword? About the true nature of their quest? The question gnawed at Rory as the miles slipped by beneath the car's wheels. Deirdre had always been clever, too clever by half, his mother used to say. She'd have questions, and Rory wasn't sure he had the answers, or if he did, whether he should share them. As they crested a final hill, a small cottage came into view. Warm light spilled from its windows, a beacon of hope in the pre-dawn darkness. Rory's heart leapt at the sight of it, even as anxiety churned in his gut. "We're here," he announced, gently shaking Henry awake. "Last chance to change our minds, lads." Henry blinked blearily, straightening in his seat. "No turning back now," he mumbled, stifling a yawn. "We've come too far." Rory nodded, steeling himself as he pulled the car to a stop in front of the cottage. The weight of their mission, of the sword and all it represented, seemed to press down on him more heavily than ever. "Right then," he said, his hand on the door handle. "Let's go say hello to an old friend." The three men climbed out of the car, stretching cramped muscles and wincing at various aches and pains. Rory led the way up the narrow stone path to the cottage's front door, each step feeling like a monumental effort. As they approached, the scent of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, mingling with the crisp night breeze. It was such a homey, comforting smell that for a moment Rory could almost forget the danger they were in, the impossible task that lay before them. He raised his hand to knock, but hesitated, his fist hovering inches from the worn wooden door. What if Deirdre turned them away? What if she couldn't, or wouldn't, help them? What if... The door swung open before he could complete the thought, spilling warm, golden light onto the doorstep. And there, framed in the doorway, stood Deirdre O'Rourke. Time had been kind to her, Rory noted with a start. Her hair was still that vibrant shade of red he remembered, though now it was shot through with strands of silver. Laugh lines crinkled at the corners of her eyes, which were as green and sharp as ever. She wore a simple dress, flour dusting the front of it, and a pencil was tucked behind one ear. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, the years falling away between them. Then Deirdre's face broke into a wide, welcoming smile. "Rory McDuffie," she said, her voice rich with warmth and a hint of amusement. "As I live and breathe, what sort of trouble have you gotten yourself into this time?" Rory couldn't help but laugh, the tension of the past few days easing ever so slightly. "What makes you think I'm in trouble?" he asked, quirking an eyebrow. Deirdre's gaze flicked over his shoulder, taking in Henry and John, then back to Rory's face. Her smile softened, becoming tinged with concern. "Because I know you, Rory. And you've got that same look in your eye you had when we were kids and you'd hatched some mad scheme or other." She stepped back, gesturing for them to enter. "Well, don't just stand there gawking. Come in, the lot of you. Whatever mess you've made, we can sort it out over a cup of tea and some fresh bread." Rory nodded gratefully, ushering Henry and John inside before following them. The interior of the cottage was just as warm and inviting as he'd imagined. all soft lamplight and cozy furnishings. Books were piled everywhere, on shelves and tables, and even in neat stacks on the floor. As they settled into chairs around a well-worn kitchen table, Rory's eyes were drawn to a stack of brightly coloured volumes on the coffee table. Children's books, he realised with a start. The covers were whimsical and inviting, featuring fantastical creatures and landscapes. Deirdre followed his gaze as she bustled about, setting out cups and saucers. "Ah, yes," she said, a note of pride in her voice. "I suppose you wouldn't know, would you? I've become quite the successful author of children's books in recent years." Rory blinked in surprise. "Have you now? Well, that's wonderful, Deirdre. Truly." She beamed at him, setting a steaming pot of tea on the table. "It is, isn't it? Who would have thought that all those stories we used to make up as children would turn into a career?" As Deirdre poured the tea and passed around thick slices of warm bread, Rory found himself relaxing despite the gravity of their situation. There was something comforting about being here, in this cozy cottage with an old friend, that made the dangers they faced seem somehow more manageable. "Now then," Deirdre said, settling into her own chair with a cup of tea. "Why don't you tell me what's brought you to my doorstep at this ungodly hour? And don't spare the details, Rory McDuffie. I want to hear everything." Rory exchanged glances with Henry and John, a silent conversation passing between them. How much should they reveal? How much could they trust Deirdre with? Rory leaned back in his chair, the warmth of Deirdre's hospitality seeping into his weary bones. The cottage's cozy interior, with its flickering fireplace and shelves upon shelves of books, stood in stark contrast to the dangers they'd faced mere hours ago. He watched as John Walker, his face still bearing the marks of their recent scuffle, reached for one of the colourful volumes stacked on the coffee table. "So, Deirdre," Rory said, his voice carrying a hint of forced casualness, "you've made quite a name for yourself with these books, have you?" Deirdre's eyes sparkled with pride as she nodded. "Oh, aye. The wee ones can't get enough of them. Tales of magic and adventure, you know. The stuff we used to dream up as children, Rory." Rory's lips quirked in a half-smile, memories of long-ago summer days spent spinning wild tales flooding back. "I remember. You always did have a way with words." As he spoke, Rory noticed a change come over John's face. The older man had gone still, his eyes fixed on the book in his hands with an intensity that set alarm bells ringing in Rory's mind. "John?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. "Found something interesting, have you?" John looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else. Excitement, perhaps? Or fear? "You could say that," he replied, his voice low and gruff. "Rory, you might want to take a look at this." Curiosity piqued, Rory pushed back his chair and crossed the room to where John sat. As he peered over the man's shoulder, his breath caught in his throat. The book's cover depicted a young girl, her red hair wild in an unseen wind, brandishing a sword against a backdrop of rolling green hills. But it wasn't the girl who had captured John's attention. It was the sword. Even rendered in the whimsical style of a children's book illustration, there was no mistaking it. The distinctive curve of the blade, the intricate designs on the hilt, the way it seemed to glow with an inner light. It was the spitting image of the sword of Nuother. Rory's mind reeled. How was this possible? How could Deirdre, of all people, have knowledge of the very artifact they sought? "It's quite something, isn't it?" Deirdre's voice cut through his thoughts. She had moved to stand beside them, a fond smile on her face as she gazed at the book. "That one's been particularly popular. The children love the idea of a magical sword that can defeat any foe." Rory struggled to keep his voice steady as he asked, "And where did you get the idea for this magical sword?" Deirdre's brow furrowed slightly at his tone. "It's based on an old legend, of course. The Sword of Nuada. Surely you remember the stories your gran used to tell us, Rory? About the Tuatha De Danann and their magical weapons?" Rory nodded slowly, his mind racing. Of course he remembered. Those stories had been the foundation of their childhood games, the fuel for their youthful imaginations. But he'd never imagined they might hold a kernel of truth. "Aye," he said, forcing a chuckle. "I remember, but I'm surprised you'd use something so specific in your books. Aren't you worried about, I don't know, cultural appropriation or some such?" Deirdre laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cozy room. "Oh, Rory, Always the worrier, aren't you? It's our heritage, love. Our stories. Who better to tell them than us? As she spoke, Rory's eyes met John's over the top of the book. A silent understanding passed between them. This was no coincidence. Somehow, someway, Deirdre O'Rourke had stumbled upon information about the Sword of Nuada, information that could be crucial to their quest. The question was, how much did she really know? And how much should they tell her? You're right, of course, Rory said, plastering on a smile. I'm just surprised, is all. It's been so long since I've thought about those old tales. Deirdre's eyes softened, a hint of nostalgia creeping into her voice. Well then, perhaps it's time for a refresher course. What do you say, Rory? Shall we revisit the legends of our youth? Rory hesitated, acutely aware of the weight of the real Sword of Nuada, hidden away in their car outside. Every instinct screamed at him to be cautious, to reveal nothing. But another part of him, the part that remembered lazy summer afternoons spent spinning tales with Deirdre, longed to confide in her. I'd like that, he said finally, his decision made. But first, I think there's something we need to tell you, Deirdre. Something important. Deirdre's eyebrows rose, curiosity and concern warring in her expression. Oh, and what might that be? Rory took a deep breath, steeling himself. It's about why we're really here. You see, it all started when Thelma was kidnapped. As Rory began to recount their harrowing tale, he could feel the weight of John and Henry's gazes upon him. He knew they were wondering how much he would reveal, how far he would go in trusting their old friend. But as he spoke, watching Deirdre's expressions shift from shock to disbelief to grim understanding, Rory felt a sense of rightness settle over him. Whatever came next, whatever dangers they still faced, he knew in his bones that bringing Deirdre into their confidence was the right choice. After all, if anyone could help them unravel the mysteries of the Sword of Nuada, it was the woman who had woven its legend into stories for a new generation.